Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and for this video we're going to be diving into one of our most requested schemes of the last few years, and that is how does our Commissions Chief Ben paint his Krieg army. So given that we've got the Krieg army box set coming out and Games Workshop sent it through to us for review, I said, Ben, send me through your recipe, send me through your process. I'm going to have a go at it and see what we can sort of create. Now Ben has an enormous guard collection. Largely Cadia and Krieg, and then they share. He's painted the vehicles in such a way that he can use those with either army. I think it's fair to say that Krieg is Ben's thing. You know, I think all of us have that one army that we just jive with and just gets the juices flowing, and you end up just losing yourself in the hobby. And for Ben, that was Krieg. And that all started years and years ago by Forge World releasing this series of books called The Siege of Vrax. These were done in such a way that they were like a historical document of, you know, a real historical conflict with just loads of maps, this incredible photography, and all sorts of miniatures that were really nothing to do with the game. You know, you have support vehicles, recovery tractors, bridge builders, things like that. And it created this incredibly evocative set, you know, of books. And the painting style in there was largely led and painted by people like Mark Bedford and Phil Stajinskas, who were very experienced military modelers. So we saw that style of painting, but on Warhammer miniatures. I think it's safe to say it sort of changed Ben's hobby and led to everything he's done sort of since. I'm a big fan, but something like Krieg, I think, can be incredibly intimidating to get a large army of. And you'll have known if you've watched any of our videos over the last few years, I've really struggled with the concept of sort of speed painting and getting any satisfaction from that. But whenever I've had Ben or another one of our painters, Ken, send me through their recipes to have a go at, I've always really, really enjoyed it, because I think those guys just get how you paint an awesome looking army and get it on the table in a realistic time frame. So that's what we're going to do in this video. Now let's paint. So we're going to start off with the cloth, and a rather suitable starting place for this is a Deathkorps Drab. Now we're going to airbrush a base coat of this on. This is thinned about 50-50 with normal airbrush thinner. I think I'm using Vallejo here. I'm spraying about 20 to 25 psi. I'm using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle. And for this, I'm using our Harder and Steenbeck Signature Series Infinity. And here we're just looking to get a nice even base coat on the cloth, not worrying about any overspray. We can tidy that up later, but equally there's no need to cover the entire model. Now the second coat, the first highlight, is going to be Gobi Brown. This is by scale 75, and essentially we're going to shoot this top down and try to cover about 50% of the area that we've just sprayed with the Deathkorps Drab. Now I'm spraying exactly the same PSI, the same dilution. I find when I'm airbrushing scale 75 paints, it helps to have a drop of flow aid in there as well. And that's what I've done here. I just got a Liquitex bottle of flow aid about 10 years ago. Still got it now, because say the only time I really use it is when I'm spraying with scale 75. So you can see the difference there that first highlight's making. And then for a second highlight, we can use AmmoMig Russian Tan. Now Ben did say in hindsight, if he was going to start the entire project again, he would probably just use the modulation set by AmmoMig that contains these the Russian tan colour. You can see here it's this sort of yellowy green tan colour. Now I have, as per usual, I think gone a little bit too subtle with this final highlight. I don't think there is enough of this colour on show. But again, in his instructions, Ben is saying cover about 50% of what we painted previously with that first Gobi highlight. I think my problem is I've potentially slightly over diluted the mix, and therefore it's not quite opaque enough on the highlights. But you know what? Let's wait for the end of the video and we can do a bit of a critique and an assessment of the scheme. Again, all we're looking to do here, cover about 50% of that area. And don't worry about getting everything exactly right. Just try and make it look cool and make sense on the miniature itself. Light source wise, we're just looking light from above. And then the other, certainly larger part of the miniature on these engineer figures is the armor plates. We've got more of them on these guys. They've got the chest plates and stuff as well. And here we're just going in and base coating it with the Deathkorps Drab. Again, a couple of these are a bit out of focus. Sorry guys, it does get better as the video goes on. But you can see there the difference already just going back and using the Deathkorps Drab on those armour panels as made. It just nicely frames that great coat that we've got. And now we're going to mix in Baneblade Brown. And that's a common theme for a lot of this tutorial. Ben has chosen to use Baneblade Brown as the sort of highlight colour or the mixed in colour to create highlights for a lot of the different stages. So when it comes to army painting, it's incredibly efficient to do something like this, but also it does bring a nice harmony, a nice bit of unity to the whole paint scheme. And here I'm just going in with my brush. He just said highlight again about 50% of the area that I covered. I've chosen to do it in a sort of scratchy, stipply way, just because I enjoy painting armour like that. Something over the last year I've started doing more and more, and I really enjoy the effect. So you can see as I'm applying it, it's actually quite a dilute mix. I've just used water on my wet palette with it, but once it's dry, you can see it gives us that nice sort of texture on the armour. And then we mix in more of the Baneblade for a second highlight. And again, this is just on the sharpest edges and sort of any panels that are really facing upwards. All of this is done with the idea that you can get a unit done in one session. So it's very, very well considered, the colours he's using, the paints he's using for this. But it's not just slap it on and you're done kind of thing. There's still consideration with how you're applying everything, but you're just being really, really efficient with what you're doing. And I was so impressed by this. I know there's barely anything on the Mini. I was having a really, really good time doing this. A lovely, lovely way to start the year off, painting this unit up. I'll talk about it a bit more at the end of the video, but it's just been absolute joy, start to finish, doing these engineers. And I'm so happy that any of you that are excited about Krieg and getting into Krieg, I think you're going to have a brilliant, brilliant time with these minis. They're absolutely wonderful. I'll definitely be doing some more Krieg over the next month or two as well. Then it was the decal stage. I'll link a video up in the top corner for how to apply decals, just dedicated purely to decals. Nice and simple with these guys because it's just the two shoulder pads. Once that was dry, I followed the process, matte varnish over the decals, and now it was time to move on to the leather. And this was a new recipe. I love a brown leather recipe. I do it tons on most models I paint. There will be leather components. But this was a new recipe for me. So base coating it using Thondia Brown. Lovely brown, well worth picking up. I find I use it more and more. And it was nice to see Ben using it in this scheme. And again, really, really impressed by the colours Ben has chosen to create a very, very drab scheme, but still make it nice, I think, nice and interesting and easy to identify the different areas of the miniature. Just saying as well, I didn't glue the backpacks in just because it gave me easier access to the straps at the back, but they just push in, stay there for painting. I just want to say a massive thank you to those of you that support us over on Patreon. If it wasn't for that support, then Andy and I wouldn't be able to do the videos on here each week, the videos over on Patreon each week, the podcast, the MPO, the miniatures ranges, all those things that Colt are doing and more to come this year is down to the support that you guys give us there. We massively, massively appreciate it. I can't thank you enough. At the minute, Andy's got a really, really in-depth series on bust painting going on there. Some truly outstanding painting he's doing there. I think probably his best piece he's ever done. So yeah, really enjoying following that at the moment. And if for any reason you can't support us there, your likes, your subscribes, your comments on the YouTube videos, they all make a huge difference. It was really cool ticking over 100k just at Christmas as well. So, you know, you guys, that's down to you. So thank you. So you can see with the leather, we used Catachan Flesh and then mixed in a little bit of that Baneblade and we were done. The metals, again, a very different approach to what I would do. Ben is a big fan of the fact that usually when you see, you know, rifles, sidearms, weapons and things like that, they don't tend to be shiny metal. So he likes to do a base coat of Corvus Black and then just do a tiny little bit of highlighting with a dark silver. This is dark silver metallic by Pro Acryl. I've just ripped the label off because it was coming off and annoying me. And we're just sort of not dry brushing here, but we are just sort of catching the edges with it. I was talking about Patreon over that leather, but just to go back to it, the Catachan Flesh over the Thondia I thought was very, very interesting because it completely changed the tone of it, even though it wasn't much of a highlight from a sort of value perspective, a light and dark. Really, really like that kind of almost pinky brown leather it gave us. Really interesting. I'm gonna explore that a bit further on some other paint jobs, I think. So you can see here just sort of kind of dry brushing, but the paint is wet, as it always is even with dry brushing. but you know what I'm getting at. There's still plenty of it on the brush. And then for the brass, I mean, in the notes, he just said, paint the brass however you want. So I've just used decayed metal and left it at that. Now, the mask, I didn't have any instructions for this one because that's not on his basic Krieg recipe. But I've tried to sort of stick to the same kind of principles and ideas, so not too many colours, and make sure that they provide a pleasing amount of contrast, but not too stark anywhere. So to get the white, I'm not actually going to use white at all. I've just used a couple of greys here. One admittedly is for sort of an off-white, and I've applied it in that sort of stipply, scratchy style. And I think what that does is it just, as I say, brings texture in. It's very easy to do, and also there's no stress doing it. You can see here the brush is sort of shaking and tapping. I had a bit of the shakes when I was painting this video anyway. I get that sometimes, and it just didn't matter. You know, it just added lovely detail to it. Now, the weathering, really, really important on something, I think, like this style. And again, just fiercely efficient way of doing it. Ben's chosen to use German camo black brown. Now, I don't know if this paint is still available in the new Vallejo range, but you can see what colour it is. It is a dark brown colour. And then we're going to pop it on a sponge, take the majority of it off. You saw me check on my nail there just how much there was, how much pressure I needed to apply to get it to come off. And here we're working around just the edges of the armour panels just to provide a little bit of chipping. And that darker brown on that lighter green colour, very, very effective. The process, the order of painting in this video, I think is very, very important. And it's something, again, I know Ben put a lot of consideration into, and that's what 15 odd years of being a commission painter does. You know, he is able to identify those efficiencies, the order of processes, you know, what is actually worth sort of doing and not. And what I loved at this was he uses the same brown and the same sponging thing to apply dirt to the great coat as well. So here, rather than being sort of delicate little dabs, little chips here and there, we really go in and smush a decent amount of that on there to represent sort of mud. And he's just said, you know, any of the splash zones, he's called them. He knows all the terminology for things. I do not. In fact, there's a good example. These little leg wrap things. They're called putties. Anyway, yeah. If you want to talk about that kind of thing, go and talk to Ben. He's very, very knowledgeable on all that. And here we're just going to use the Baneblade Brown straight over whatever paint we had oversprayed on them. What I would say here is I have thinned this Baneblade right down, probably at least 50-50 with water on my wet palette. Often the lighter the colours you're going to be using, the easier it is to get quite a chalky finish with them. So it's really worth thinning them right down and applying a few coats. And all I'm doing is mixing in a little bit of that grey you saw before to lighten it up for highlights. And just working my brush towards the centre, just to provide that little sort of highlight on there. And again, I think just like the mask, these little areas of that brighter, lighter detail, very, very effective, very, very impactful. Then we go back to our German camo, black brown. And this is for any little leather parts that isn't to do with the webbing. So things like the gloves, the boots, we just go over the overspray, whatever paint is on there. Don't worry about it. As long as you've been fairly neat and tidy, it's probably still mainly black from your primer. And we're just going to do a simple highlight with that, covering about, I don't know, 80-90% of the area. And then just like before, we're going to mix in that Baneblade Brown for a quick highlight. I'm just amazed at the quantity of boring colours that we've got on here, yet you're getting a ton of definition. And we haven't even done any washes or anything like that yet, which I think is cool. And then he just says use a bright red for the eye lenses. So I've used one of our upcoming reds from our paint range that'll be coming out soon. But use something like Evil Sun Scarlet. That's a nice bright red for now. And now on to the wash. So the instructions just say, once you've done everything up to this stage, get a dark brown wash. Initially, I was quite careful with it. By the sort of 10th Krieg, I think he said by the 10th model he was just slopping it all over. So I've chosen Sepia by Abteilung 502. Despite the name, it's actually an incredibly dark brown colour, so it's perfect. If you haven't got a dark brown colour, but you've got a black, say, and a burnt umber, just mix them up and use it. That'd be absolutely perfect for this. Or go out and grab something like Sepia if you want to. I'm just checking the mixture. It's roughly 50-50 oil and mineral spirits there. So we call them white spirits here in the UK, mineral spirits most of the rest of the world. You don't want to over dilute your oil because it will end up splitting. So roughly 50-50 should give you a nice sort of what you'd associate as a wash consistency if you use something like, Agrax Earthshade, that sort of thing. And we're just going to apply it over the entire miniature. Now, we don't need to do any varnishing. As long as all that acrylic paint is dry underneath, we can just apply this straight over. It's not going to rub any of it off. It's not going to reactivate it or anything like that. And even though we are going all over the model, I'm not just slopping it on. I'm applying it in areas. So I've done the torso, the head, an arm, the other arm, the leg, the weapon, just to make sure I get every area. And if I do notice it pooling in any of those areas, like an excess of it, I will just wick that off with the brush and move it around. And it just means there's going to be a lot less cleanup work to do later on, which again speeds up the process. And again, this is a recipe that Ben has, it's tried and tested, it's proven to work. I think he did 60 troops one weekend, but essentially it's, you want to get a unit done in a hobby session. That might be a small tank, that might be 5 engineers, that might be 10. That's the way we're sort of working at here, trying to achieve it, so that between games you can get a new unit painted up. And now, giving it a matte varnish at the end, Ben did used to use Ultramatte, but as I think a lot of people have been experiencing, including ourselves, Andy and myself, Ben, AK Ultramatte, after a small amount of time, maybe 6 months, appears to be going quite shiny on your models, which is a real shame. So we've switched over to using a matte varnish. This is AmmoMig. And as you can see, once that's dry, it's given a lovely unified finish, and I think they look amazing. I didn't quite get that colour right on the highlight enough on the great coat. Now, don't tell Ben about this bit. I've gone in and done one extra step, and that's just because these are for me and I wanted to enjoy it. I've just gone back in and reapplied that final highlight on the armour panels. A little bit of tippy-tappy chips just along the edges, the helmet, the shoulder pads, things like that, just to help with that little bit of extra definition between areas on the miniature. He doesn't do this. I have done this on mine. I think that's the great thing about getting recipes and stuff as well, is you can always put your own little spins on them as well. But that was the only reason for doing it, was I just felt I wanted to see a little bit more definition on the paint job I had done. Now for the basing, I don't have the particular basing stuff that Ben uses. Russian mud is what he's using, but I just got this dry ground texture, so I've just used this, and then once it was dry, I've painted it in like a dark brown colour to roughly emulate the colour he's got on his bases. I think that's worth saying as well, guys. When you're following recipes, don't always have to get the exact paints. Sometimes, as long as it's fairly close and you know why you're doing that colour, you've probably got something that you could use. If I was painting an entire army of it, I wouldn't want to use mixes, though. I probably would go out and purchase the actual paint that person had suggested. And then once that was dry, we're just going to go in and apply some weathering powder. And this is light sienna. It's a powder you'll see me use very often in the videos I do. It's one Ben loves as well. He applies it by smooshing it in dry, tapping off the excess, and then with a damp brush just running that over the top, so that essentially it takes it off the highest surfaces of that texture paint underneath. So you get this lovely kind of areas of dust and grime sitting down, and then that sort of fresher mud on the top where it hasn't settled. It just gives, I think, quite a nice effect to finish off the miniature. And there we have them. So I just love having a go at schemes that people like Ben and Ken send through. I learn so much from doing them. Just, what matters, what doesn't matter. I still don't think speed painting is for me, but I really, really admire the way it's done. And many of you will probably argue this isn't speed painting, and I may or may not have put that in the title, whether it's speed paint or not, because it does seem to annoy people. But in my opinion, if you're getting a unit done in a session, that's speed painting. But I think they still look just awesome. I always strive when I'm doing videos for the channel to try to create the definitive scheme for a certain faction. For me, that is, I'm not saying it's the definitive, but for my definitive scheme of that faction. And I would say over the last 4 years, I've achieved that 3-4 times, something like that. But for me, what Ben has done with this scheme is the definitive Krieg scheme. You absolutely could take this recipe on, execute things to a much higher level, but still using the same colours and the same ideas, or you could just do this exact process and create a phenomenal looking army. I'm going to chuck up some photos, some various pics. I asked Ben just to, he had them out on the side. I was like, chuck them on the gaming board. Let's see these miniatures in context, because I think that's so important when we talk about army painting and speed painting, is to see the minis on the table, normal lighting, what do they look like? And I hope you agree with me. I just think they look awesome. I just a really wonderful way to start the year with these guys, because it's a ton of fun. It's a ton of fun. I don't really know what else to say about them. I mentioned earlier, I don't think I went high enough with that highlight on the greatcoat. I prefer how it looks on Ben's. I still would go in and do that little extra highlight on the edge of the armour as well. That took me 14 minutes to do the 5 guys. I don't really think that's a huge amount of extra time to spend on something, so I was willing to do that. But I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you've enjoyed seeing how someone other than myself is painting things and me having a go at doing them. We're going to be seeing a lot more from Ben tutorial-wise over this coming year, and I hope that sort of rounds out the kind of things we offer between the proper high-end masterclass level stuff, usually over on Patreon, down to the sort of high-end army painting level, down to the more mass-produced but still awesome-looking armies that you can paint and get out there on your gaming boards. So if you've got any questions about anything I've done in the video, pop them down in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you ever so much for all of your support. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com and maybe Ben can sort you out.